will talk about savoring authenticity, food consumption, and nostalgia in Japan.
Good afternoon. As we know, food represents an important link between culture and the environment in Japan. It belongs to both because it combines certain biological function with culinary practices, symbols, and values that historically have produced a complex cultural heritage, also representing a privileged lens for the observation of the social, political, and economic connection between food production and consumption. Japanese cuisine, or washoku, a term that encompasses both regional and traditional food, has now consolidated its popularity on a global level. While the Western discovery of sushi and ramen occurred in the 1980s, with the progressive spread of sushi bar and the Japanese restaurant or takeaways in the Western cities, Japanese cuisine really gained international recognition in 2013 when it was added to UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage list, thus unquestionably establishing as a global food phenomenon. So the strategic importance of washoku is also highlighted by the creation of mass media identifying images of food production, such as rice fields, rural villages, or places of artisanal food production. And at the center of this cultural logic is the production, reproduction for culinary imagery functional to the policies of identity construction that have transformed Washoku into a particularly plastic form of collective representation. Umi no Sachi to Yama no Sachi, that means treasure of the sea and the mountains, is a popular expression to indicate the rich gastronomic heritage of Washoku. Rice, the basic cultural ingredient of traditional Japanese cuisine, sansai, that refers to mountain vegetables and other products such as matsutake mushroom, roots, and wild fruits, and fish, that is tuna, bream, salmon, and mackerel. Rice, in particular, marks a symbolic border that separates Japan from Asian gastronomic culture such as China or Korea. As Emiko Nukiterni has observed, rice fields have played an important role in the identity of the self or in the identities of the Japanese. Thus, the symbolism of rice is forked. On the one hand, rice as our food, on the other, rice field as our land, reinforcing each other. If Washoku is therefore a typical total social fact, whose historical specificity is rooted in the cultural narratives of Japanese collective identity, its promotion also represents a means of international recognition as it establishes a link with the global food market and entails a strong involvement of relevant interest groups in the agribusiness field and the tendency to commodify Japanese food practices. Among the countless economic interests at stake, it is necessary to also consider those linked to the tourism sector in light of the growing importance of gastronomic tourism. Here, the presence of authentic food culture and the local gastronomic tradition is seen to offer a deeper way of experiencing certain places, thereby significantly contributing to defining the social imagery of washoku. The opposition between the enhancement of the food heritage of washoku and the globalization proves to be an important rhetorical strategy, but at the same time, the global-local dialectic leaves several research questions concerning the real protagonist of the political-economic competition that is being played out on the international scene, despite the UNESCO's insistence on the centrality of local communities. However, beyond this complex debate, the turning point was undoubtedly the addition of washoku on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage list, which has been regarded as an attempt to construct a national culinary culture in response to globalization. The mass media have become filled with articles, news reports, and debates on washoku, praising as a suitable, healthy, and gastronomically correct, in line with the culinary paradigms expressed on a national scale. In other words, washoku has often perceived as a safe way of providing a sort of new gastronomic orientation to encourage the cooking and consumption of this idealized, standardized food at home. Scholar, chef, and government official, for example, have often worked together to promote Washoku no Hi or Washoku Day, encouraging students, teachers, and the families to set aside November 24 as a day to prepare and serve healthy Japanese food. And so, Washoku has gradually taken on the connotation of authentic food, capable of reconnecting taste and tradition, recipe and season, appetites and health, local identities and citizenships, according to established custom parts of the Japanese gastronomic heritage. Unlike many other terms used by the mass media to indicate the Japanese culinary tradition, Washoku would appear to indicate a more intimate sphere of meaning than terms like Nihon Ryori. The semantic difference is that Washoku indicates a Japanese meal, while Nihon Ryori refers to any Japanese dish. Also, both Washoku and Nihon Ryori are generally translated as a Japanese food or Japanese cuisine. However, on closer examination of the terminology, it's possible to know that Nihon Ryori mostly indicates exclusive cuisine offered by restaurants, while Washoku refers to the daily food of ordinary people, home cooking, or people's food. In Japanese popular discourse, Washoku constitutes a grammar of sentiment, strongly linked to the most intimate domestic environment in connection with cooking, food-related practices, and domestic consumption. The lending of a particular identity-defining value to Washoku has in fact translated into a nostalgic feeling of irreparable loss of one's own identity, becoming part of the imaginary of Furusato, or old village or native place, a term that could be extended to the whole nation, Nihon Furusato, ancient Japanese village. At the center of this cultural logic is the production and reproduction of a nostalgic and native narrative founded on the temptation to withdraw into the stylized and idealized world of yesterday. While nostalgia is generally understood as an emotional reaction experienced when external or internal stimuli lead back to an ideal past moment or event that may belong to one's life experience, the nostalgic emotions that emerge from an idealized past are focused on inanimate places, smells, tastes, and sound, discovered at the very moment in which these emotions are experienced. And this process of crystallization of nostalgia is expressed precisely by the term furusato, which implies both a temporal and a spatial dimension fulfilled by identifying and supporting a common cultural worldview. Moreover, as Jennifer Robinson observed, furusato is used above all today in an affective capacity to signify not a particular place, such as a real old village, for example, but rather the generalized nature of such a place and the warm nostalgic feelings aroused by this mention. Furusato can indicate a rarefied dimension of nostalgic reenactment with a non-historical foundation. But it's also true that this word, if placed in connection with other cultural contexts, acts as a powerful catalyst in the process of identity construction. The close relationship between Washoku and the Furusato establishes a symbolic connection with food consumption, which represent a metaphor of the self that recalls the socially constructed dimension of food, closely linked to its ability to be to act and as a social catalyst and to define a new identity horizon. With regard to this last point, two examples may be enlightening. The first is the close connection between the nostalgic imagery of Furusato and the city of Kyoto and its culinary tradition. Kyoto is often considered the cultural capital of Japan, from which traditional culture sprang. It has thus become the hometown of Japanese heart and mind, that in Japanese is Nihon no kokoro no furusato. This identification with the authentic Japanese tradition also applies to the gastronomic culture of Kyoto, that is called kyoryori, which would be the source of much of what is now considered to be the quintessential Japanese cuisine. However, while it's true that kyoryori is often considered the emblem of a kind of cultural particularism, a certain Kyotoishness, that is in Japanese Kyoto Rashisha, that contrasts with the process of erosion caused by globalization, it's also true that many Kyoto chefs have tried to actively reshape the local culinary culture and to control the Kyoto food industry on a global scale. This wavering between different global local culinary market policies is an example of the apparent contradiction that is part of the conversation with both the state and the market. Beyond this dialectical tension between globalization and the local cuisine, it's clear that strong identity media alarmism persists. This is quite evident if we consider the cultural anxieties that have emerged in post Fukushima Japan, in which food consumption and nostalgia have been linked to the neoliberal notion of self help and to the neoconservative sentiment of nation and tradition. After the Fukushima Daiichi disaster, the Japanese media debate has often focused on the resilience project and on criticism of the model of scientific prediction of a nuclear disaster, promoting the return of traditional Japanese value, folk custom, and the wisdom of previous generation, that is Senjin no Chie. Again, the nostalgic rhetoric of Furusato has become part of media debates focusing on the preparation of emergency meals in which Japanese culinary culture, that the washoku bunka, is regarded as an indispensable resource in the context of crisis. Let's take, for example, a brief reflection by the Japanese scholar Koikari Mire. She writes, with much focus on Japanese tradition, one publication makes a surprising statement about food and resilience. After so much intake of seaweed as part of their basic diet for generation, Japanese bodies are naturally resistant to the effect of nuclear radiation. Sakamoto Hiroko is a passionate advocate of this return to Japan's past. In her 2012 book Daidokoro Bosaijutsu, that is Disaster Ready Kitchen Techniques, co-authored with her daughter, the culinary specialist Sakamoto Kana, the mother-daughter pair argued that women can learn from the lifestyle of bygone days, mukashi no kurashi, when modern domestic conveniences were not yet available, but housewives managed to make do with whatever they had. Recalling what it was like merely 40 years ago, women can figure out what to do in the modern day context of disaster. With a strong emphasis on tradition, they recommend that women cultivate a relationship with the rural farming families and communities whom they can rely on a source of food in emergency times. Japanese women must recover, rediscover, and reconnect with Furusato as a way to prepare for the unknown and unpredictable future. In conclusion, even if there are undoubtedly strong gender implications in equality of observation, there are also ethical and political implications related to the problem of food consumption and its role with respect to the wide range of meaning-making activities and discursive dynamics triggered by disasters of the heart and the soul, Kokoro no Shinsai, in post-Fukushima Japan. As we have seen, Washoku is a particularly rich medium for ethical orientation because it encapsulates tension and contradiction in the management of the contemporary Japanese culinary heritage, and nostalgia further amplifies its cultural and symbolic value. As Plaster has observed, food becomes self, and when we take food into the body, we take in the world. This is especially true in the case of Washoku. Its power lies in direct embodiment of use value, which continue to redefine a new cultural horizon and socio-economic tension, thus continuing to constitute a not so obvious interdisciplinary arena of inquiry. Thank you.